Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Firewall, the business bycast, where tech beats business. Get expert insights and real-world business leaders, IT experts, and the latest trends in bite-sized episodes. Stay ahead and explore what's beyond the firewall. And welcome back, everybody, to Beyond the Firewall, where we're always bringing in amazing speakers and guests. And today is no other. We're bringing in Lee. Lee, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and what led you to launch Gorilla Coaching?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ariz. I appreciate it. I am basically semi-retired from the corporate world. I was in the corporate world on and off for about 35 years. My background was in human resources, but I expanded beyond that into basically executive senior management by the end of my career. I quit in 2017 because I was fed up with the corporate grind, and I haven't looked back since then. I basically wanted to establish myself as a person that helped small business owners who were struggling with growth. And so I've really sort of fine-tuned my audience over the last 8 years into working with business owners that are in the middle of and or thinking about expanding their businesses, their operations. And so I help them deal with the messy stuff that comes with expansion, the growing pains, if you will. So that's what I've been doing, and I'm having a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I can relate to that. At the end of the day, I started my business, got to a certain threshold and knew what I knew, but I also didn't know what I didn't know. And the hardest part was actually getting beyond that, as you frame it, messy growth. And so, when an entrepreneur or an executive in a business kind of gets into that muddy waters, sort of how do you kind of identify that? Like, how do you realize this is my aha moment? I'm now at the point of I need help and I'm in a messy growth stage.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I deal only with the founders and owners of the business. I don't deal with their executives. I don't deal with CFOs or COOs or anything like that, partly because the businesses that I work with are usually small enough. And when I say small enough, I mean small to medium size. So anywhere from a handful of employees up to maybe a couple hundred or something like that. Their revenues are usually they can range up from, say, a quarter or $500,000 in revenue per year through to about 10 million, roughly. Some more, sometimes less. The key things that distinguish messy growth are basically what I would put in three buckets. One, it's the positioning of the business within the marketplace and how that positioning is unfolding. So it's more of a strategic look at the business and where it's spending most of its energy and resources trying to reach its audience or trying to sell its products or services. The second bucket is the operational bucket. And that's usually where, business owners struggle a lot because, especially when they grow, because they don't consider all the aspects of their business that need to grow with them. So things like business processes, how the organization is designed, the people that they hire, how they do the work inside the organization, all those things become part of that operational mechanism that tends to get pretty messy when it starts to grow. And the third bucket is their revenue engine. So do they have the cash flow to grow? Because when you grow, you go through step changes in the growth process when it comes to your finances and your revenue. When you grow, you spend money, of course, and usually. And when you spend that money, you have to have it replaced at a certain point in time. What we often call in finance, we call that receivables. So money coming in, and then payables, money going out. So those two have to balance each other. Otherwise, you get a deficit in that process. So that's usually where owners struggle because they run out of money. Or when I say they run out of money, they run out of cash. So they have to have a plan in place in order to deal with that. So those three buckets tend to be the messy parts.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with you on that. I find that, as we were growing our firm, having the proper cash flow and the necessary runway to make those next hires were always challenging. And it was also You wanted to hire the right talent, but did you have the right cash flow to hire the right talent, or are you just hiring, the person that was within your budget may not be the right person in the right position. So there was that lessons learned in the beginning for me. I know that
Yeah.
we were hiring people that can afford or really are willing to take what I was able to pay, but they weren't necessarily the right person for the job. And eventually you kind of get to this right equilibrium. And then the second challenge I found was, when you're in that upper echelon of what you're talking about from that half million, 10 million, when you're north of the 5 million, what ends up happening, which is another big envelope part of that hiring process and cash flow process, is around mid management. Because at some point in time, you can't be involved in every transaction. You can't be involved in every aspect of your business. And so having those people in place and the resources and trusted people in that advisory board or advisory positions are going to be more challenging than ever because you're now putting the trust of your business in somebody else's hands. So
Yes.
it is truly a hard, call it pillars to kind of, keep on growing and expanding that. So
Yeah.
great for helping identify that.
Yeah, it's a juggling act for sure. And at some point, like you said, the business owner themselves are not able to juggle all the balls that are being created. There's just, it's virtually impossible for one person to do it all. So you do get to a point where you have to start hiring people in order to help you manage the internal operations of the business and, anything else that goes along with that.
Right. So as part of that, like, looking at being an entrepreneur myself and kind of going through this journey for the listeners out there, how does a founder or business owner, you know, figure out when it is a good time to engage in an advisor or to get some strategic positioning like what you're talking about? Like there's so many businesses out there. I think, in Canada, we've been up to now, one of the world leading countries in the world where, 90% of the economy was small business. I think
Mhm.
Microsoft pegged it in over 92% a couple of years ago. So there's so many businesses out there and unfortunately so many fail, let's call it less than 5 years of age. How do you kind of help, listeners out there to realize this is not they don't need to do this on their own. What's the
Yeah.
messaging out there?
Well, I mean, to answer the first part of your question, what are the time or what are the points where the owner realizes that they need to get help? The first thing I want to say is most owners don't. They just don't. They struggle. You know, they live in a vacuum that, where they A, don't trust people to run aspects of their business, or B, they don't feel like they need the help for whatever reason. They're independent, they've been solo since the beginning. Some entrepreneurs have never really had a real job. So they don't know what they don't know, like you said earlier. So it's a struggle for people like me looking from the outside in, because I can see, and I go back to the three buckets. I can see the operational issues. I can see the cash flow issues. I can see the strategic issues in the marketplace for the business. So, what I try to do is, if I can get in front of the owner for just, you know, 20 minutes, half an hour, I'm usually able to, and I ask a lot of questions. That's the number one thing that I do. So I ask a lot of questions about the business and about how the business is operating, how it's running. That helps me determine sort of where the choke points might be or where the bolts might be flying off. And so when I do that, then my job initially is just to raise the awareness of the owner, honestly. So I look for those trigger points where the owner is struggling. And again, it comes back to those three buckets. If they're struggling financially, if they're struggling strategically, from a marketing point of view, from a competitor point of view, whatever it is in the marketplace, if they're struggling just to find their audience in the marketplace, that might be part of it too. And then operationally, I look for the trigger points there. Are they spinning people through their organization and they're frustrated with that because they can't find the right person? They can't seem to land the right person, or they've got Uncle Fred running the payables and Uncle Fred is not very good at it. But they hired family because that's just what you do when you're an owner, and you don't trust, people from the outside getting involved in your business. So you hire somebody rather than somebody who's actually competent at the job. So those tend to be the trigger points for people. It's the loneliness, it's the isolation that owners struggle with. So one of my very first things I do is in that initial conversation is really just trying to understand the mindset of who I'm dealing with as far as the owner of the business. Some owners, you can never get through to them. It just won't happen. And they wonder why their business is failing, but it's just a reality. You and I both know that in the first 5 years, 80% of businesses fail from startup. And, a lot of it has to do with how the business is positioned, how it operates, and how it's financed. So it all comes back to that. If I can get an owner in front of me that's willing and able to resonate with the triggers that I'm pointing out to them. Because that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask a lot of questions and then I'm going to just fire it back to them. I tend to be a pretty, no filter type person, I guess.
Yeah.
Call a spade, maybe. So I'm just going to fire it back at them. I'm going to say, look, have you thought about the fact that the reason the people you're hiring don't ever work out is because you really haven't thought about what kind of positions you want in your organization? What do you need? Rather than looking at, oh, that person seems competent, I'll hire them. Or, I'll hire cousin Susie to do my bookkeeping because, oh, she did payroll one time at this, company she worked at. That's the trigger points that I look for. Operationally, I look for broken processes. Where is their operation not working right now? And it usually boils down to something very simple like their financial tracking, accounts receivable. If their accounts receivable are 120, 180 days overdue, like
Right.
that's a serious issue. And so
Yeah.
you've got to be able to deal with it, right? And a lot of the time, the owner doesn't know how or doesn't understand why they should be focusing on that, even though it seems obvious.
Agreed. Yeah. And I find that most business owners, have a hiring issue because they're not HR people. At the end of the day, I found that even when I started hiring all my first several staff members, it was all gut check, Joe sounds really nice and he seems like he knows what he's doing. And so I'm just going to give him the job and, great. And you throw some salt over your shoulder and you hope that he delivers on some promises there that was committed to in that interview. And I don't think that there was a proper hiring process when I started my business, but looking at that today, and I know this is a very loaded question, but I'm going to say the most common. So, when you look at starting a conversation with most business owners, where do you see common challenge within organization? Is it usually the people, the process, leadership? Is it accounting? Where do you see most companies out there today are struggling to get their heads around things correctly? I'm always finding that there is some commonality on why most businesses like these fail.
Yeah. The biggest issue, I think, is what is often called emerging leadership issues. So when you think about businesses that are within that $10 million revenue range, you're probably dealing with an owner or a founder who's never managed people before. They've never managed systems before. They've never, you know, really looked at a strategic plan before in depth. So again, I come back to those three buckets, right? On the positioning side, one of the most common things I see, and I'll share a little story. I just finished working with a client who is a budding entrepreneur. He's quite young, just bought a car wash, but he's also a tech nerd. So spends a lot of time developing AI automation systems. And he wants to apply that to his car wash, which makes sense. It's a great idea, actually. But he's also got, sort of projects going on. He's got another AI project that he wants to develop. He's got another automation system that he wants to design. And he's got all these balls going, because he's a creative person, right? And entrepreneurs tend to be that way. They tend to be very creative and very sort of action oriented. And so one of the first things I said to this owner was, look, you just bought a car wash. Like, where do you think most of your time and your energy is going to be spent in the next 6 months? Just to manage that, just to get to know that. So the first thing I said to him was, and this is a common theme across most entrepreneurs at that level, at that, up to $10 million level, is they get too distracted. They get too diffused uh, in their daily sort of activities with their business and or businesses. So it's not that they're not being successful, because they usually are, to a certain extent. They wouldn't have gotten, 5 million, 10 million in revenue if they weren't, right? So
Right.
the issue is, and this is where the messy part comes in, is they don't stay focused. So a lot of businesses will do something very strategically important to do at the beginning of a business, which is just find customers, any customer in your general field, and engage them. And so that's what they're used to doing. But when you get to a certain point, you have to start focusing on who your audience really is. And in order to do that, you have to understand your audience. So one of the first things I said to this owner was, look, do you know who your audience is for this car wash? Do you know who your audience is for your AI business? Do you know who your audience is for your automations? Like, tell me. And he couldn't, because he hadn't really gotten that far. Right. So the issue really is about focusing. And so I spent a lot of time doing that, just getting the owners focused
Reining in people
strategically,
in.
focused operationally, focused financially, focused people wise, whatever areas they're struggling with, it's
Yeah.
usually because they're just not paying attention.
Yeah, it's very true. I think every entrepreneur has that shiny object. I'm not going to use the word ADHD, but let's call it that. They've got this. This sounds good. This sounds good. This could be a really cool thing. I know
Yeah.
I suffer
Yeah.
from it. Every entrepreneur I know and I'm friends with, they all suffer from like a not shiny new object opportunity. And yeah, it is a challenge. I won't lie. It's one of
Well,
the
I,
biggest things.
I'd be interested to see what the stats are, because this is just anecdotal for me, but what the
Sure.
stats are for serial entrepreneurs that have ADHD.
I think all of us have some level of it, but yeah, the entrepreneurs are notorious. I have many beers and coffees with them, and they all have this aspirational side to them, and then they have their core side to them, and at the end of the day, they all have these little side hustles that they try to find some new toy to play with. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a tough one. It's a tough
yeah,
one to be disciplined.
yeah.
I would
It
say
is.
it's a very small number of entrepreneurs out there that are micro focused or laser focused to the point that they focus on what they do, they know what they do, and they don't want to dove into anything else because they see the success.
Yeah, and if you can get to that mindset and direct your business that way, then in my experience, your success multiplies quite quickly.
True. So interesting about that, we're looking at different organizations. I've worked with several other coaches over the last 20 years. And I found that different coaches help me evolve my practice in different ways. Some were more tactical, some were more strategic, some were more, call it empathetic in respect to being more in touch with my customers and my staff's needs. And we've been talking a little bit here and there about your angle and the way you operate. But what is your differentiating factor? Like what is it that you do that's a little slightly different, or that little bit of a difference that would be an aha for a lot of business owners out there today to understand why you want to use a coach, and at the same time what your differentiation is?
Yeah. Uh, I think the big thing for me is I come from the trenches. I've owned and operated my own businesses as well as being, a senior person in large scale to medium scale operations, enterprises, we'd call them. The largest business I've worked inside was producing, it was a manufacturing organization in downstream petrochemical operations. We produced 700,000 tons of polyethylene plastic, which, I'm not real proud of now because it's all out in the oceans, but that's another story.
Uh,
This was back when I was young and ambitious.
we were all less aware.
Yeah, yeah. So, I've cut my teeth on being able to systematize and make sort of operations work methodically and efficiently, organizations work methodically and efficiently. But I've never lost the entrepreneurial side of me. So I understand the mindset that goes into being an entrepreneur. You've got to be nimble. You've got to be able to pivot, and you've got to be able to respond. And in order to grow, if you don't do that, then, you sink and you fail. So failing forward, I love that phrase because it really implies that you are doing failure consciously, intentionally. And if you're able to do that in a way that, maintains at least some level of efficiency within your enterprise, then you're much more likely to grow and to succeed. So, what I bring to the table is sort of that balance, like you mentioned, the balance between, understanding the financial side, understanding the operational side, understanding sort of the mindset and being able to empathize with the person. I get it. I totally get it. Been there, done that. So my expertise is really being able to address all the areas that they need to address as a solo owner or as maybe a partnership ownership situation. So for me, it's about relationship building as much as it is sharing my knowledge, my technical knowledge. I find that owners, because they don't trust just anyone, and because they've been probably hounded by consultants and hounded by salespeople, to me, it's not about making a sale. It's about establishing a relationship with the individual. And that's what a coach should do, in my mind. We should be able to establish a relationship first and foremost, and then
So,
apply the technical parts of what we need to do or what the
so
owner needs to do.
yeah, so interesting you say about building that relationship. My first question would be, or the question I have for you next is to start the conversation with the business owner. What's one of the first questions you ask to understand what that business owner is going through right now? Like, what are the conversation openers?
What keeps you up at night? Why are you here in front of me? Because
Right,
something, the owner may not trust the situation of being face to face with me right away, but something got them there. And that something is usually a nagging kind of issue that's in their mind. It's either niggling away like a worm at the back of their mind, or maybe it's right front and center. Who knows? But one of the first things I ask is, yeah, what what's stressing you out right now? What's keeping you up at night? What's causing you to question things? What's causing you to doubt? And that usually just opens up the conversation. They're either willing to be vulnerable at that point and start talking about it, and most of them are, believe it or not, because that question's nobody asks that question of owners. Nobody seems to really care, you know,
true,
what they do at night when they go home. They don't care. They want to know if they can sell you a widget or a system or a AI agent or whatever it is these days, right?
right.
I just want to know what's going on, and I want to know their head space.
Right. So if you're willing to share, you know, working with, all these businesses over the last decade or so that you've worked with as a coach and an advisor, what was an example of a breakthrough moment that, helped a business owner go through, sort of a transformational moment? Can you talk about one of those aha moments?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that for most owners, that there's one single aha. It tends to be a series of smaller sort of, "Oh, I get it," light bulb moments, maybe.
Mhm.
Not like, the heavens opening up, but more just the light bulb. And it's usually just a little Christmas tree light bulb to begin with.
Sure that.
So, for example, I have worked with one owner who is in the floral accessories business. So these are flower shops that she sells to. And one of the things that she does is she has created a special invention that allows people to clip on boutonnieres rather than pin them on. That's a big deal in the
It
flower
is.
industry. It's huge.
Huge.
Yeah. So, she's gone through several, and she would tell you this if she was here. She would say, I've worked with Lee over the last 10 years or whatever it is. It's been that long. I've known her for more than 10 years, but we worked together on this basis for about 10 years. And she said one of the aha moments or the light bulb moments would have been seeing how her business processes, her internal systems could be structured in a way that eliminated the chaos that was happening inside her business as she was growing. One of the first processes we worked on solving was her sales to inventory process. Sometimes it's called SIOP, sales, inventory, operations, production. That's a whole system inside a business that has widgets, and she sells widgets. That's all they are in the end, right? So it was constantly a struggle for her to keep track of sales and then relate that back to, what her inventory of product was, and then relate that back to how she was storing that product and how she was transporting and shipping it out the back door. So front end to back end, big system in the, you know, in that business. And it was growing and it was becoming more complicated. And so what we did was we broke it down into steps, what we often call process steps, basically process innovation, if you will. And as a result of that, she was able to smooth out, that whole internal system. It took a long time. It took a year probably to do that. So that's what I'm saying. It wasn't really just an aha moment, but I would get a call from her every once in a while and she would say, Lee, we did it. We have enough inventory on hand for all the sales that we're going to make in the next X amount of time. And it's like, yeah, that's a win, right? So it's really about the small wins all along the way.
It's interesting you say that, and one of the challenges that I've always found, even for myself over the last decades, is that aspect around, nobody can do it as good as I. I am the master of my domain, but yet I also have
Yeah.
a challenge to trust others to deliver the product, the service, the support, the relationship that I deliver in my business to my customers or my prospects. And so
Yes.
how do you break down some of those trust factors and be able to build these processes so that the owners can let go? Like, I think this is one of the biggest barriers for every business owner that may have the best widget or the best service out there. Could be
Yep.
the best car wash company that this guy's going to run, but he's holding on to all the chips, right? He's not
Yes.
delegating, he's not building out all these things. How do you get through those barriers? And how do you build that trust?
Yeah, it's a staged process. It doesn't happen overnight, because you're dealing with an individual who has beliefs, they have values, they have a system of sort of working, and they've developed that over time, over their lifetime, usually. So the first stage, the first phase of that is, as I said before, it's awareness building, right? In order to help an individual build awareness, you have to be able to, I have to spend time getting to know them. And that's why it comes back to the relationship part of this, right? So if I can tell the owner things that nobody else wants to tell them or is willing to or is capable of telling them, then that's the first step. It's letting them know, look, you know, you came to me saying that you have a bottleneck and you're pointing a finger at that broken, shipping process you've got in the back end of your warehouse, and you're pointing at the individual who's running that process. I'm going to say, point the finger back at yourself. You're the bottleneck. Why? Because, and this is to your point, Erez, you are stepping in and taking over that process whenever the individual tries to do something with it. Like, what are you doing? Why are you in there messing things up? Well, I'm fixing things because they don't do it right. They don't do it the way I want it done. And I said, well, maybe then it's a question of deciding whether or not your time is best spent doing that, first of all. And this is a really complicated process for an owner, because in their head they're thinking, well, I could do that in 2 minutes. And, this person takes half an hour to get that done. And I'm saying, yeah, you're right. You've been doing this since the business started. Makes sense. Let me ask you a question, Mr. or Miss Owner, Ms. Owner. How much is your time worth? Your personal time, how much is it worth? And so I get them thinking about, okay, if you're in the back packing boxes at X amount of dollars an hour, and they usually underestimate their worth. Oh, I'm worth,
Very much
maybe
so.
$50 an hour. I got to
Very
say,
much
whoa,
so.
let's stop right there. Yeah. Let's stop right there and really evaluate, what your time is worth. And so I'll get them to
Uh-huh.
do an actual exercise to evaluate the worth of their time on an hourly basis. And it usually ends up running into the hundreds of dollars, if not
Yes.
more. And
Yes.
so I say to them then, okay, you've seen that, you know that you're worth $500 an hour. Why are you in the back packing boxes? So that's the first step. It's awareness building. It's recognition of, yeah, you've got a good set of values. You want your systems done correctly. I get it. The system is here in your head. It's not on paper, and it's certainly not in the head of the person that you hired to do that. So let's talk about documenting or documenting your process. Let's talk about training your process. And let's talk about transitioning that process over to someone who then can do it on their own. You can still, monitor it. You can still have reports sent to you on it. You can still have regular meetings to go over, issues, but you don't have to do it.
Agreed. I nailed it. Like, I can tell you right now that my first coach that I worked with, over 15 years ago for myself, was taking everything out of my head, like all the processes, all the procedures, elections, bills, playbooks,
Yeah.
everything was in my head.
Yeah.
You ask any entrepreneur, oh, how do you do this? And they'll be like, well, it's up in here.
Yeah. They can
How
rattle
does
it
your,
off, no problem, but there's nothing
yeah,
written down anywhere. Yeah.
yeah. And so my first coach worked with me on actually sitting me down. And he's like, I don't need you to write it. He goes, I need you to tell me verbatim, like record it, whatever. We're going to sit down and we're going to document it. I'm going to document it. And I'm going to write your standard operating procedures on all of this. And, it was like I would never really sit down to do it. But the fact that my coach sat me down to ask me these questions and then help me document it. And then what was really effective for me was the fact that my coach at the time was also able to frame it much better than I could, because that's what, just like you worked in all these corporations and, like you've got that talent skill set to actually call it entrepreneurship gibberish and actually make it into a legible document that everybody else can read and repeat. So, you're going through that, and identifying those hurdles, gaps, bottlenecks, and having somebody handhold you, I think is a huge element on helping businesses move forward, because 8 out of 10 times the business owner does not want to leave his office or her office because, what are they going to do without me? And then second, none of it's properly documented. So I think
Yeah.
people like to feel important. So, hey, ask the boss on, how much this goes for. Or ask the boss, what do I do in this circumstance? And ask the boss on, what am I going to do over here? And next thing you know, 20 people are coming into your office every day to ask you how to do things and how important it is. But the reality is nobody realizes, in your case in point about what's your time worth, I'm answering questions here. And if my time is worth over $100 an hour, which it better be, because otherwise I can go get a job. And I'm sitting here going, great. now I've got his playbook that my coach helped me write and put together. I'll be like, did you check the playbook? And they'd be like, no. I'd be like, first check the playbook and then find out if you need to come and ask me those questions. So I fully agree with you on that. Like, to
Yeah.
me, it was the biggest hurdle in the sense of becoming a scalable business, allowing people to, be accountable for those processes and being able to actually start seeing momentum in my business
Yeah.
because of
Yeah.
exactly that process.
The accountability part is important to me. So I take it sort of a one step further than your coach did. What I
Sure.
do is I don't write the processes. I get the I you know, and this is accountability. I get the owner to write the processes. I show them how and I walk
Right.
them through it. And with, my floral client, for example, we sat down one day and we mapped out the entire process as she saw it, took it out of her head, put it on paper. But she did it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it for her. So, you think about a coach in sports, right? A hockey coach or a track and field coach or something like that. The coach doesn't get out and run the marathon with you or for you. The coach tells you and gives you the tools that you need and shows you how to do it. And then you go and practice it till you get
Right.
better at it. So for me, it's very important that the owner learns the process because if they don't understand, if they're just handed it, if I mapped out, business process mapping is very extensive, by the way, it can be. And if I mapped out her business process for her, what good would that do? All that would do is, encourage sort of a disdain for doing that kind of work. So
Sure.
I get them to do it themselves. And then they understand the process and they see where the breaks are. As soon as you start mapping something out, you start to see where the breaks and the gaps are right away. And second of all, it gives them the skill to be able to do it on their own so that they don't need me around. I believe that, I should work my way out of a job. So I want to give the owner as many tools and skills as possible in order for them to become maybe not an expert in process mapping, but certainly someone who understands it.
Right. Well, you know, we've talked about your processes. We've talked about, common challenges of business owners out there today. And I think one of the big questions everyone's talking about right now is what's changing right now as an entrepreneur in 2026 and beyond, leading into the next generation. We've got a world of AI, we've got a
Yep.
world of automation,
Yep.
uncertainty.
Yep.
What are your predictions and what are your sort of thoughts about what entrepreneurs need to start thinking about?
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of pundits out there that are much smarter than I am in those areas. But I would say that AI is probably your biggest sort of emerging news for the new world. I think as a business owner, you need to understand if, when, and how AI will affect you. For someone in production and manufacturing, for example, AI is going to be able to do pretty much everything. So, within a few years, and so maybe even sooner. So things like process mapping, people, those kind of things are going to become pretty easy to do within a business. And by people, I mean there's going to be less need for frontline, people in manufacturing for that reason. In fact, it's already been a trend over the last 10, 15 years, simply because automation in itself and robotics has taken over a lot of manufacturing and even gone into construction now. So robotics is starting to be able to do large parts of construction projects now. So with the advent of AI, that's only going to increase and only going to become more pervasive over time. So as an owner, you need to be thinking about that. It's got to be on your mind. You've got to be not only dealing with the strategic positioning of your business, your finances, and, your people and operations, but you've got to be thinking about and with a mindset that is open to understanding how AI will impact you and your business over the next given amount of time. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And when we look at AI today, I can say that what my predictions were for 24 to 36 months are being brought down to 12 to 18 months now.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's just gonna be, you know, before we know it, there's gonna like there will be initially, I think, a lot of, labor problems. In other words, people being laid off as a result of AI. It's already started in almost every sector that's
right.
affected by AI. Even AI in my role, AI can do a lot of things that I normally would do. Fortunately, there's still a certain personal aspect to what I do, but who knows? I might be fully retired in 5 years. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I think that the augmentation of using, call it, robo advisors and stuff like that, like we as an IT company are already investing into that
Yeah.
in the sense of basic questions. We know that, hey, I need to reset a password, or, should I pick this software package over this software package? And the AI agent can ask you like 5 to 10 questions to narrow down your selection
Yeah.
without having to spend my time trying to help you identify those
Yeah.
questions. So
Yeah. Exactly.
these are definitely things that will be augmenting our world. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, and I definitely think that one of the things that business owners out there, including myself, are all trying to figure out is how is that going to impact my business? How do I roll that into my business? Speaking about AI, but one of the things nobody talks about is how am I going to differentiate my business? Because everybody out there is going to have a similar set of tool sets around AI, and one AI versus another AI, it's going to be fairly similar. There's
Yep.
gonna have to be a differentiating factor,
Yeah.
and nobody's
Exactly.
talking about that.
Yeah, for sure. And, IT, yeah, I think you're going through, a really, one of the most obvious sort of transitions in IT for sure.
So, I know we're coming up to close to the top of the hour, and we try to keep people on point here, so I wanted to kinda wrap up our podcast with one
Hmm.
of those deep aha moments or one of those deep thought moments, and I always love to kinda pick the guests, brain on this one. So, the question I have for you is, if there's one lesson you wish every founder understood earlier in their journey, what would that be?
I think the understanding their own values and beliefs regarding running their business, their mindset, I call it mindset, being able to understand that in the context of where they've been and what it took for them to get where they are, recognizing that that mindset going into the future, especially if they're growing or they're trying to scale their operations, their business enterprise, that mindset has to shift. And it has to shift from an entrepreneurial mindset into what is often called a CEO mindset. They need to be able to understand what they need to do, fundamentally, what their job description is in the business. So if their job description has been chief cook and bottle washer, and packing boxes in the back and, running out on bank errands and doing all that stuff, that job description needs to change. And it needs to be more of a job description focused around what would a CEO do? And eventually they're going to hire a CEO or a COO to run their business for them. And so then what do I do as the owner? Where am I? Like, where am I in this? And it comes back to a phrase that's often used. You want to be able, as the owner, to work on your business, not in your business. And what working on your business means is, what do you like to do? And I have a 6 question questionnaire that I give all my new clients, and I get them to go away and reflect on it. And the questions are, what are you good at doing? What do you like to do? What are you absolutely needed to do in the business that's critical for the business? Even though you may not like it, or, you may not be good at it, what do you need to be doing in the business? So, that's the start of that questionnaire. It's, really sort of getting them to do a deep dive into who they are in relation to the business. Because up until now, they've been the business. It's them. And really, to grow, you need to begin to have that arm's length distance from operating in the business, and you got to focus on the business. So, strategically, business development wise, creating new opportunities in the marketplace, understanding where your industry is going and what that means for your business. Those are the things you should be focusing on. That's working on the business. If you're out there doing business development lunches with other, owners or prospective clients or, stakeholders or vendors or whatever it is, that's good. That's where you should be,
Yeah,
not working in the back.
definitely.
So divest yourself of all that stuff that you did up until now, or most of it anyway.
Yeah, no, I love it. And yeah, I fully agree with you on that. That phrase of working on the business, not in the business. People take it for granted. Lee, I want to thank you for being on our podcast today. For all the listeners out there, Lee from Gorilla Coaching out there. Your website again is gorillacoaching.com or
No, it's Gorilla Coaching. That's two R's and two L's. Guerrilla. Guerrilla, as in guerrilla tactics, military. Think
there
outside
you
the
go.
box.
There you
Guerrilla
go.
Coaching, Gorilla Coaching, one word,
Yeah.
.ca, because I'm a proud Canadian.
Bill Canadian. There you go. I love it. Well, thank you to all listeners. If you liked what you listened to today, please like and subscribe. We're always, bringing on some amazing new speakers every month and every week. Lee, again, I want to thank you for taking the time being on our podcast. It was a pleasure having you.
No problem. Yeah, it's been great. I can talk all day on this stuff.
Well, maybe we'll have you back on another episode and we'll focus in on one vertical or one
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody for listening. We'll have you back. Talk to you soon. Take care. Have yourself a great day.
See ya.